Jacob had spent most of his life living behind invisible walls. Walls made not of stone or steel, but of fear, hesitation, and the belief that he was born for an ordinary life with ordinary outcomes. Yet deep inside him flickered a restless spark that refused to die. A quiet yearning to wander beyond the familiar streets of his small hometown and discover what existed on the other side of predictability. But every time he tried to move, his mind whispered doubts, responsibilities held his feet down, and circumstances wrapped chains around his dreams until one day, after yet another exhausting shift at a job that drained every ounce of enthusiasm from his heart, he looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the bus window and realized he no longer recognized himself. And it was in that silent realization that a single thought rose with the force of a storm. If I don't change my life now, nothing will ever change. And with that, he made the most impulsive decision he had ever made. He quit his job, packed a single backpack with clothes, a notebook, and an old camera, and bought a one-way ticket to a country he had only seen in travel documentaries but had always dreamed of visiting, a place filled with mountains that scraped the sky, rivers that cut through ancient valleys, and roads that twisted through remote villages like threads of forgotten stories. And as he sat on the plane listening to the hum of the engines, a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration coursed through his chest. But instead of pushing it away, he embraced it, knowing that discomfort was the first sign that true growth had begun, and the moment he stepped onto foreign soil, greeted by cold wind carrying the scent of pine and distant rain, he felt something shift inside him, something awaken. And he understood that life was no longer waiting to be lived. It had already started moving the moment he dared to step out of his old world. In the beginning, the journey was not as romantic as he had imagined. The jet lag hit him like a wave. He got lost in the first city he visited. His phone battery died, and he didn't know the local language well enough to ask for directions, but as he wandered through unfamiliar streets, he realized that being lost wasn't always a curse. Sometimes it was the universe's way of showing you what you never knew you needed to see. And as he passed through markets filled with the fragrance of street food, the chatter of vendors, the vibrant colors of handcrafted fabrics, and the music of a culture so different yet so beautiful, he felt his senses widen like a lens adjusting to new light, absorbing every detail, every story, every emotion that floated around him. Eventually, he found his small hostel located at the edge of a hill overlooking a valley layered with terraces of golden fields. And though the room was simple with creaking floors, dim lights, and a window that refused to close all the way, it felt more meaningful than any place he had ever lived because it belonged to a version of himself that had finally broken free. And that night, as he sat on the rooftop, wrapped in a blanket sipping tea offered by the hostel owner, he listened to stories from other travelers, people who had crossed oceans, climbed peaks, survived heartbreaks, conquered fears, and each story ignited something new inside him, until he realized that the world was a giant book, and those who never travel read only a single page. Determined to write new chapters in his own life, he set out at sunrise the next morning to trek through a mountain trail known for its beauty but also for its difficulty. The path was steep, the wind harsh, the cold numbing, and at several points he questioned his decision as his legs screamed for rest. Yet every time he looked back and saw how far he had climbed, he felt a surge of pride that pushed him forward, and eventually he reached a viewpoint where the world seemed to stretch endlessly, mountains rolling into more mountains, clouds floating below him, and silence so deep it felt like a conversation with the universe itself. And standing there, breathless from both the altitude and the overwhelming beauty, he understood something profound. Sometimes you must climb far outside your comfort zone to see clearly what truly matters. Over the next weeks, Jacob's journey took him across deserts shimmering under unforgiving sunlight, through forests where ancient trees towered like guardians of forgotten wisdom, and across villages where strangers welcomed him like family, offering meals though they had little, sharing smiles that needed no translation, teaching him that kindness was the universal language connecting all humanity. And with each encounter he learned not only about the world, but about himself, about his resilience, his compassion, his courage, and the truth that he had spent years underestimating his own strength. In one of the remote villages he visited, he met an elderly carpenter crafting intricate wooden figurines with hands weathered by time. Jacob asked him how he remained so passionate after decades of work, and the man replied with a gentle smile, saying, "A person's life becomes meaningful when his heart travels farther than his feet." a sentence that etched itself permanently into Jacob's memory, serving as a reminder that travel wasn't only about moving across landscapes, it was about transforming from within. Inspired by these lessons, Jacob began keeping a journal of his journey, filling pages with reflections, sketches, and moments that moved him, and as the journal grew thicker, he realized he was slowly stitching together the story of a life he was proud of, a life shaped not by fear but by curiosity, courage, and intention. Along the way, he also faced challenges that tested his emotional endurance. A storm that forced him to seek shelter in an abandoned cabin for a night. A sudden illness that left him weak for days, moments of loneliness when he longed for familiar faces, and times when he doubted whether he was running toward his purpose or simply running away from his past. But every night when he looked at the stars he had never truly noticed back home, he felt a strange calmness wash over him, reminding him that every journey worth taking was meant to challenge the soul before rewarding it. One day, while exploring a coastal trail, he encountered a young woman named Elena who was traveling alone after recovering from a personal tragedy, and as the two walked together along cliffs overlooking turquoise water, sharing their stories, fears, dreams, and lessons learned, Jacob realized how travel connected hearts that would otherwise never meet, creating friendships built not on convenience but on shared humanity, honesty, and vulnerability. And although their paths eventually parted, the kindness she showed him, and the strength she carried despite her grief, gave him a new perspective on resilience, how it wasn't the absence of pain but the willingness to keep moving despite it. Months passed, and Jacob's journey stretched across countries, languages, climates, and cultures, shaping him with every sunrise and humbling him with every sunset. And somewhere along the long, winding roads, he felt the invisible walls he had lived behind slowly crumble, until all that remained was a version of himself he had always wished to be but had never believed he could become: a man who trusted life, embraced uncertainty, appreciated small moments, and understood that freedom wasn't found in reaching a destination, but in allowing oneself to walk boldly toward it. Eventually, after nearly a year of traveling, Jacob reached a mountain peak known by locals as the place where wishes breathe. And standing at the summit, surrounded by winds that carried whispers of centuries-old stories, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling gratitude swell in his chest for every step, every struggle, every stranger, every moment of fear he had overcome, and he realized that he no longer needed to search for purpose in distant places. For purpose had woven itself into him through the journey itself. He had become stronger, wiser, braver, and more alive than ever before. And as he descended the mountain, he understood a truth that would guide the rest of his life. The world is endlessly vast, but the greatest journey is the one that transforms who you are inside. And as long as he continued to move with intention, curiosity, and courage, he would never truly be lost again. Because home was no longer a place. It was the person he had become through the miles he had walked, the challenges he had faced, and the dreams he had finally allowed himself to chase. A living reminder that the moment someone chooses to break free from fear, the entire world becomes a path waiting beneath their feet. After returning from the mountain, known as the place where wishes breathe, Jacob thought his journey had reached its emotional peak. But little did he know that life had only revealed the first chapter of his transformation, and the world still held countless lessons waiting for him across horizons he hadn't yet imagined. So instead of heading home, he stood at the crossroads of a small valley town, staring at the signboards pointing in multiple directions, each representing a different version of the future. And after a long moment of reflection, he decided to continue moving east toward the ancient trade routes he had heard travelers whisper about, paths filled with forgotten cities, spiritual sanctuaries, harsh deserts, and stories buried in time. And as he began walking along the dusty road leading out of town, he felt an unexpected sense of clarity rising within him, a quiet conviction that the more he traveled outward, the deeper he traveled into himself. Days turned into weeks, and Jacob found himself navigating landscapes that looked like scenes from distant myths. He crossed arid plains cracked under the relentless sun, walked through narrow canyons carved by centuries of wind, and passed through nomadic camps where firelit nights echoed with songs older than history, songs that stirred something ancient within him, reminding him that humanity's roots were far more connected than modern borders suggested. In one desert settlement, he met a wise storyteller named Aaron, an elderly man with eyes that shimmered like burning embers despite his age. Aaron invited Jacob to sit by the fire and listened to tales of kings who had risen from dust and returned to it, of travelers who set out seeking treasure but found truth instead, and of those who wandered aimlessly until the desert taught them purpose. Stories that resonated with Jacob so deeply that he felt as if the flames themselves were whispering guidance into his heart, telling him that wandering was not a sign of being lost, but a way of being found. Before Jacob left, Aaron placed a hand on his shoulder and said in a raspy voice, "Every traveler carries questions within him, but the desert only answers those who walk with patience." A sentence that lingered in Jacob's mind for days as he moved onward. Eventually, he reached an ancient city known for its stone temples, narrow alleys, and bustling bazaars where merchants from different cultures gathered like threads of a tapestry, weaving languages, scents, colors, and histories into one vibrant space. And it was here, surrounded by ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of human struggle and triumph, that Jacob experienced one of the most transformative encounters of his journey. While sketching a temple in his notebook, he noticed a young boy selling handcrafted bracelets. The boy's clothes were dusty, and his sandals were worn out, but his smile was so bright that it seemed to challenge the hardships of his life. And when Jacob asked him why he smiled so much despite the difficulties he clearly faced, the boy replied simply, "Because every morning is a chance to begin again," a line so pure and wise that Jacob felt humbled beyond words. Realizing that resilience did not belong only to those who had climbed mountains or crossed seas. It lived in ordinary hearts who chose hope despite hard realities. Inspired by the boy, Jacob spent several weeks in the city volunteering at a community center where travelers often helped teach language skills to local children. During this time, he discovered a joy he had never felt before, a joy born not from exploring new places, but from contributing to the lives of others. And he realized that travel brought meaning not only through personal discovery, but also through acts of connection, kindness, and shared humanity. However, despite the warmth of the city, Jacob felt a persistent pull to continue his journey, as if the earth itself was whispering that more paths awaited him. So he packed his belongings, bid farewell to the friends he had made, and set out toward the mountains that bordered the eastern edge of the continent. The climb through these mountains was far more challenging than anything he had experienced before. The narrow trails twisted like serpents. The mist rolled across the landscape like ghostly waves, and the cold seeped into his bones. But for every moment of difficulty, he found a moment of extraordinary beauty. Waterfalls cascading from cliffs like liquid silver, forests so dense they seemed to breathe, and sunrises that turned the sky into a painting of fire and gold. During one particularly harsh storm, Jacob sought shelter in a monastery perched on a cliffside, where monks lived in silence, dedicating their lives to meditation, compassion, and deep understanding. Though the monks spoke little, their calm presence taught Jacob powerful lessons. How peace was not the absence of chaos, but the ability to remain centered within it. How clarity was not given but cultivated. And how the world reflected the state of one's inner being. One monk, Brother Kalen, sensed the restlessness within Jacob and invited him to stay for a few days. During their walks through stone corridors and silent gardens, Kalen shared gentle wisdom about purpose, fear, and the nature of the self, reminding Jacob that even though he had traveled far across continents, the longest journey he would ever take was the journey inward. When Jacob finally left the monastery, he felt lighter, not because his problems had vanished, but because he had learned how to carry them differently, with acceptance, awareness, and courage. As he descended the mountains and entered the lush valleys beyond, Jacob met a group of travelers heading toward the coast, and though he had been walking alone for months, he decided to join them, curious about how companionship might shape this new chapter of his journey. The group consisted of people from different cultures, professions, and life stories. An artist who had lost her inspiration, a retired engineer searching for meaning after decades of routine, a dancer recovering from heartbreak, and a quiet young man who rarely spoke but carried a camera everywhere, capturing moments the rest of them often overlooked. And as they walked together, shared meals over campfires, crossed rivers, climbed cliffs, and watched stars glitter above them like scattered diamonds, Jacob realized that travel was not only about the places he visited, but also the people who walked beside him, each carrying their own invisible battles, dreams, and hopes. Their conversations became lessons, their laughter became healing, and their struggles became reminders that every human heart was traveling, whether across land or through life itself. Eventually, the group reached a coastal village where waves crashed against rocks with thunderous force. And here Jacob felt another shift within himself. A deep hunger, not just to keep moving, but to keep evolving, to keep becoming, and to keep embracing the unknown with the same courage that had first driven him to step onto that plane months ago. One evening, as he sat on the beach watching the sun melt into the horizon, painting the sea in shades of molten gold, he reflected on how far he had come. From a man trapped in routine and fear to someone who walked freely through the world, guided by curiosity and purpose. Strengthened by challenges, softened by compassion, and illuminated by countless stories of humanity he had encountered along the way. Yet even with all this growth, Jacob felt he was still at the beginning of something greater, and as he dipped his feet into the cold waves, he whispered a quiet promise to himself to never stop exploring, learning, giving, and evolving. For he now understood that life was not a single journey, but an endless series of departures and arrivals, expansions and contractions, losses and discoveries. And the moment one stopped moving, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, was the moment one stopped truly living. With this renewed conviction, Jacob prepared to leave the coastal village and continue his travels across the ocean to new continents, new cultures, new lessons, and new versions of himself yet waiting to be discovered. Knowing that no matter where the winds carried him, he would walk forward with an open heart, steady footsteps, and the unwavering belief that the world rewarded those brave enough to seek more than comfort, more than routine, and more than fear, turning every path into possibility, every stranger into a teacher, every sunrise into a reminder, and every mile into a step toward the person he was destined to become. As Jacob boarded the old wooden ferry that would carry him across the vast ocean toward a new continent, he felt a mixture of excitement and uneasiness swirling within him, like two tides pulling at the same shore. And though he had traveled far and grown in countless ways, he knew that the next chapter of his journey would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. For every great transformation required new storms, new awakenings, and new leaps into the unknown. The ferry rumbled beneath him, its engine humming like a tired heartbeat, and as waves crashed gently against its sides, Jacob leaned on the railing, staring at the endless horizon where the sky met the water in a soft blur, thinking about how the ocean symbolized the deepest mysteries of life, vast, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying, yet always beautiful. And it occurred to him that he, too, had become like the ocean, shaped by wind, molded by storms, deepened by experience, and full of unseen worlds waiting to be discovered. The ferry carried passengers from different countries, each with their own stories stitched into their eyes. And Jacob found himself drawn to these quiet strangers. An elderly woman clutching a diary filled with faded letters, a young musician polishing a handmade flute, a tired couple holding hands with the determination of those who had survived difficult seasons, and a little girl tracing constellations in the air as if she held the entire universe in her fingertips. These small details reminded Jacob that every traveler was a walking story, every journey a silent prayer, and every step taken away from home was an invitation to become more than one had been. During the week-long crossing, Jacob spent hours sitting on the deck, listening to the waves whisper secrets of distant lands. He befriended a sailor named Tomas, a man with sunburned skin and a laugh shaped by years of salty air, who told him tales of storms that nearly swallowed ships, of ports overflowing with music and chaos, and of nights when the sea was so still it felt like drifting through a dream. And from Tomas, Jacob learned that real courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. That real strength wasn't loud but steady, and that life had a way of rewarding those who kept moving even when nothing made sense. But midway through the journey, a heavy storm erupted without warning. Thunder cracked across the sky, the sea rose in towering walls of liquid darkness, and the ferry shook violently as passengers clung to anything that could help them stay upright. Jacob felt panic surge through him, a raw instinctive fear he hadn't experienced in months, and for a moment he questioned why he had ever left the comfort of his old life, why he had chosen uncertainty over stability, storms over safety, and dreams over predictability. Yet as he gripped the railing, soaked to the bone, feeling the wind howl like a wild beast, he suddenly remembered the monk's words. Peace is not the absence of chaos, but the ability to remain centered within it. And closing his eyes, he took a deep breath, grounding himself not in safety but in trust. The trust that storms eventually pass, that fear eventually softens, and that no ocean, no matter how fierce, could stop a soul determined to grow. After hours of battling the storm, the sea finally calmed, and dawn revealed skies washed clean by the rain, painting the world in soft shades of pink and gold. Jacob felt reborn, as if the storm had not merely shaken the ferry, but had shaken loose the last pieces of fear hiding within him. And when the ferry finally reached the new continent, a bustling land of towering mountains, colorful towns, and forests that stretched beyond the horizon, Jacob stepped onto the dock with renewed purpose, ready for whatever destiny awaited him. His first destination was a sprawling coastal city known for its blend of ancient architecture and modern ambition. Narrow cobblestone alleys twisted between tall buildings, decorated with murals that told stories of hope, struggle, and triumph. And as Jacob wandered through the city, he felt an electric energy humming in the air, the energy of a place where people dared to dream loudly. He soon found himself drawn to a small cafe filled with artists, writers, and travelers whose conversations buzzed with creativity. Here he met Mira, a painter known for capturing emotions rather than images, and she sensed immediately that Jacob carried stories inside him like sparks waiting for oxygen. She encouraged him to turn his journal into something more, a book, a documentary, a message for others who felt trapped by fear. And though Jacob initially doubted himself, Myra's conviction planted a seed in his heart, a seed that would grow into something far greater than he imagined. Over the following months, Jacob traveled deeper into the continent, through emerald rainforests where the air tasted like life itself, across cliffs that tested his endurance, along rivers that shimmered under moonlight like liquid stars, and into villages where he learned forgotten crafts, ancient traditions, and profound philosophies that reshaped his understanding of what it meant to be human. He met shamans who taught him to listen to intuition, farmers who taught him the value of patience, musicians who taught him that rhythm existed not just in songs, but in the beating pulse of life, and elders who taught him that wisdom was not found in answers, but in the courage to keep asking questions. But it was in a high-altitude village, nestled between clouds and cliffs, where Jacob experienced one of the most defining moments of his journey. He met a man named Kai, a former mountaineer who had lost his ability to climb after an accident. Yet instead of giving up, Kai dedicated his life to training young climbers, teaching them not only technique but character, discipline, humility, resilience, teamwork. And when Jacob asked him how he remained so hopeful despite losing the very passion that once defined him, Kai smiled with quiet strength and said, "When life takes one dream from you, it is often because it wants to give you a better one," a sentence that struck Jacob like a revelation, reminding him that loss was not an ending but a doorway, and that true purpose often revealed itself after the hardest moments. Inspired by Kai, Jacob decided to attempt a daunting climb known as the Celestial Ridge, a jagged mountain trail considered one of the most challenging routes in the region. The ascent was brutal, pushing his physical limits with every step, but it also awakened a fierce determination within him, a hunger to test the boundaries of his courage. And as he climbed through icy winds, across narrow ledges, and past cliffs that plunged into depths of chilling silence, he realized that mountains were more than stone. They were mirrors reflecting the strength one often forgot existed within. When Jacob reached the summit, standing above clouds painted in golden light, he felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, pride, gratitude, wonder, and a powerful sense of clarity that washed over him like warm sunlight. He understood then that he was no longer the man who had once stared at his reflection in the bus window feeling lost, nor the man who had boarded a plane seeking escape. He had become someone forged by experience, shaped by challenge, softened by compassion, expanded by wisdom, and strengthened by countless miles of journeying through both the world and himself. He realized that travel had not changed him. It had revealed him. It had peeled back the layers of insecurity, fear, and limitation to uncover the courage, purpose, and passion that had always been buried within. As he descended the mountain, his heart felt lighter than ever before, filled with a new mission, one he had not chosen but discovered, to share his journey, not as a story of adventure, but as a message to those who felt trapped, afraid, or uncertain, reminding them that the world was full of doors waiting to be opened, that fear was only a shadow created by the mind, and that the first step, however small, was always the most powerful. And with that mission guiding him like a compass, Jacob continued his journey across the continent, knowing that every sunrise would bring new lessons, new people, new transformations, and new chances to live boldly, courageously, and fully awake, embracing the world not as a map to be followed, but as a miracle to be experienced, one step, one moment, one breath at a time.